Squad has been going from strength to strength with each and every update over these past 2 years. New factions, new maps, and even an incredibly risky move to completely overhaul core gameplay mechanics, especially with the infantry combat overhaul. Add on top of the fact that more and more people are getting into the tactical team-based FPS games, especially with more and more titles coming to the fray, it makes you wonder, what's next for Squad? Well, that's what we're going to cover in today's video, because there's also been a few leaks that I think a lot of you guys have missed, especially the most recent one being the ATGM rework. But on top of this, some of the other things I want to go over is a bit of a wish list of things that I'd personally like to see in Squad. Quite frankly, the world is their oyster right now when it comes to moving Squad forwards, but I think we all need to be a little bit realistic with what could be coming in the future. However, following a few patterns and trends could be a few clues that the developers have left behind. To start off with, we will look at factions, and as most of us know, there's a new faction right around the corner, and that's the PMC faction, of which will be bringing a whole host of new assets and weapons, including the M320 grenade launcher that was leaked during some Discord related shenanigans, but also the potential of the MP5 and quite possibly the M14. But we also know a little bit about their ethos. The main points being, they are independent, so can come up against anyone depending on the biome in which they are set in. They will lack heavier equipment such as infantry fighting vehicles, but will have specialist light vehicles to deal with such things. They will have a wide variety of modern small arms with aftermarket upgrades, and they will only be available as lighter classed battalions such as light infantry and airborne. So that insinuates they also get a helicopter. So essentially what we're looking at is a modernised and fairly wealthy irregular faction. Now, as for factions to be added, there's a whole host to choose from. The Bundeswehr and the French army, for example, who would be huge additions to top the game for Blue 4 and have been widely asked for a very long time. Other great nations to add will be Poland and now Finland for a bit of variety. But they would need some other factions to go up against to keep that variety flowing for both sides. I know right now some form of irregular force for Sanchin Islands and the Pacific Theatre would be great, especially as a lot of people don't really like playing as the PLA. It would just add in a slight extra bit of diversity to that map. But for me, the two main independent factions I would love to see brought in would either be the Indian Army or Brazil. They've got plenty of unique equipment, which will really add in some extra spice into the game, but it would also showcase some lesser known forces that most people wouldn't even normally consider. Although I wouldn't be against having another fictional nation that is heavily based on Iran purely just for their rocket artillery boats. But before we move on from factions, there's 2 or 3 that exist that could really do with a top to bottom overhaul, and those are the Middle Eastern Alliance, the British Armed Forces, and some ways the US Army. For the most part, Middle Eastern Alliance's equipment isn't so much of the problem apart from the recycled Russian vehicles, but it's mainly the player models for the MEA that just feel incredibly out of place, and just a huge army of cloned children. They definitely need some facial hair through the ranks and make them look a bit more weathered and worn. I've always loved the beret for the MEA squad leaders, but again, even he looks too clean cut. If I could ever ask for one thing though, I'd love to see the MEA squad leaders get a Desert Eagle as a sidearm. I don't know why I have always wanted this, but I always thought it would be dope as hell to pull that out when in a pinch. Middle Eastern Alliance needs a visual overhaul, maybe bin off the HK51 and replace it with the MP5 that's now coming to the game through the PMCs. But for me the biggest one is the Brits. And I'm not saying this because I'm British, but man, the British have been so incredibly unloved in Squad, it's not even funny anymore. The only additions they've had in the last 3 years was the NLAW, the CTAS, which has now been removed from all rotations, and the SA-330 helicopter, and the half-cooked Elcan Spectre optic on most kits. Now yes, the NLAW was a great addition in old Squad, but there has been so many more launches been introduced in the game since that the NLAW is now probably one of the worst heavy AT launches in game, purely for the fact that if a vehicle's past 600 meters, you ain't gonna hit it. But the RPG-29, the RPG-28, even the Carl Gustav will fire past that range. But on top of all of this, the players and vehicles look incredibly old now, and in a lot of cases very low poly. And the vehicles, while some of my favourites to use, are incredibly underpowered since opposing vehicles have been slowly buffed and power crept up over the past few years. The BRDM, for example, can kill the British Scimitar before the Scimitar can even get 9 shots off. So what would be some good additions to the Brits? Well, for starters, having the little red dot on top of the optic would be a fantastic start, as currently the British Armed Forces and Squad right now have no real close quarters options. So this would bridge a big gap in the infantry and make them much more viable. Alternatively, they could just give the Brits the same optic that the Aussies are using, which can be changed from a 1x to a 4x, but that's just a cheap way out. Another solid addition would be the introduction of the mighty Chinook, and this could be split out into a few other armies to use, such as the US Army, where it could find a good place. But it could really find a good role with the mechanised and armoured battalions by being able to carry a much larger payload of ammo and construction compared to all other nations' helicopters. And let's face it, they just look and sound epic. And I do remember a long time ago, before Squad had helis, there was a heli mod and it had the Chinook in it. And another fantastic addition would be to give some of the FV510 warriors stabilization. Maybe just give it to the normal FV510 and not the up-armored ones or something? I don't know. That would be up to Off-World Industries to balance out, but it would certainly make their vehicles much more user-friendly and in a lot of cases would make the warrior much more viable, especially on smaller maps such as Narva and Mutaha when things are tighter. But the 30mm a long time ago used to feel incredibly strong. Now, that 30mm region, it just feels pathetic. So Off-World, if you're watching, come on man, do me a favour, yeah? And as mentioned before, the US Army could definitely do with some love. Again, they're starting to feel incredibly dated and old. Maybe find a few more bits and pieces to add, whether it be new vehicles, some new tech, I don't know. But they definitely feel like they could do with a little bit of love sent their way. Now moving on to maps. Haven't really seen any clues yet as to where the next locations will be, other than we all know that the Pacific Theatre will be actively worked on, as that only incorporates one proper map, which is Sanctions. I don't class the Pacific Proving Grounds because that is just a tech demo really. I'd still love to see a Central American or a Central European map, or even a fully urban map somewhere on the Ukrainian and Russian front. But when it comes to maps, I'm pretty much open to anything. But there are a few maps that are feeling incredibly old and very dated, so an overhaul on those would be incredible. For me, Talil needs to have more points of interest and places for infantry to move through rather than just wide open deserts. Now I do enjoy that map, but it's very much an armour player's playground. The best layer is when it's all in the north, and all the infantry fights over those two urban areas, or in the hangars at the very centre. So a Talil rework would be a great move, especially for those who just prefer doing infantry. Al-Basra, which everyone knows is the king for invasion, could do with a lot of love as well, especially since the way that the ICO have changed things up. Again, it's an armour player's paradise, so some channels for infantry to move through is going to help that map dramatically. But I also think Fool's Road will be a great map to overhaul. It's got roots back to Project Reality, so it's a classic in that sense. But a top to bottom overhaul with an expansion could really see that fit within Squad again. Now whilst the infantry combat overhaul is still being adjusted and tweaked, I've seen a huge influx in people asking for a vehicle overhaul, and I'd be all for that, especially when it comes to the driving and handling. We all know driving in Squad is a mediocre chore at best. There's some incredibly broken and jank issues that ruins it for a lot of people. Canadian vehicles still, to this day, cannot climb up the smallest of incline unless in first gear. It would be nice to have some more in-depth hitboxes for vehicle modules, and I've always thrown out the idea of a fueling system in an effort to get vehicles to really think about where they're going, and would also help stop them rushing the first cap or from being a million miles away from infantry. But the one thing I'm in no rush to see is thermal imagery, especially for gunners and especially in tanks. Thermals take away the skill of spotting, and it'll just become a duck hunting situation. Anyone who's played War Thunder at top tier knows just how strong thermals become. And especially while suppression is so strong, they will almost be impossible to counter. Maybe thermals could work for the commander's turrets that have no gun attached to them. So the Leopard and Challenger, for example. And you could give it to the ZTZ so long as OWI remove that stupid prototype 50 cal from them. But for me, the only thing that should have thermals is the commander's drone. Doing this would make the commanders use them for more than just calling in assets. And that moves me on to my next part, and that's the commander abilities. You could go wild with this. You could do anything from reducing the cooldown of vehicles to being able to request a vehicle, similar to how it's done in Hell Let Loose. Imagine being light infantry going up against armoured. After 15 minutes, the commander can call in 1 extra tank, so your team now has 2 MBTs instead of 1. But as a counter, it can only be done once, and it delays other assets by 5 minutes. So, there's still a choice to be made. All factions should have vehicles that the commander can call assets from as well, similar to how Insurgents, Militia and VDV can currently. Maybe it should just be a Jeep that only the commander squad can use. But when you look at some of the G-Wagons and the Humvees, you'll notice that they've got a radio inside them. Something like that will be perfect. And to round off this section, just some more support assets would be nice. I mean, the Brits are still using the A10, which was told that would only be a placeholder, and the PLA was supposed to be getting a bombing run that seems to have been completely forgotten about, and just some extra other options like a cruise missile or a B-52 bombing run, like what's used in the Steel Division mod. It would just make things so much more diverse. And now for a few leaks that you guys may have missed. And the first one being the anti-tank guided missile system rework. OWI have released a very short video showcasing the new reworked ATGM system. And I mean totally reworked. They boast new missile flight model, new guidance mechanics, new visual effects, and a designated tutorial. But there's also one other thing that happened in this clip that a lot of you may have missed. And it seems that smoke has also been changed in all of this. At the start of the clip, you'll see that when the missile is fired, a red ring appears on the optic. Now I don't know if that's there to let you know that the missile is active, or if that ring will shrink down and you have to keep your projectile within that ring to maintain good trajectory to hit your target or not. But that's the first major change here. The second is the flight path, and it has a much more true to life corkscrew effect going on, but I want to say that it looks like they're flying a little slower than they used to as well. So now not only is it going to be harder to hit targets at range, the target now has a small amount of extra time to react. Which brings me on to my third and final thing here, and it's the fact that the driver launched smoke looks like it's caused the missile to miss. And that's not a miss from the trajectory. You can see that when the smoke interferes, the trajectory changes. Now we all know the Coronet is laser guided, so does that mean that 40mm launched vehicle smoke has the capabilities to interfere with infrared? This is a perfect counter to the current toe spam meta that we're seeing on larger maps such as Scorpo and Talil, but it still requires your crew to see it and have good reaction times. Now I expect damage may be increased due to all the new difficulties and counters at play here, but ATGMs no longer look like they will be a point and click adventure. I wonder then if the wire guided will actually launch a wire when it's fired. The next one I mentioned briefly earlier, and that's the MP5, M14 and the M320. Which was also showcased in one of OWI's newsletters. So it's highly likely that these will be used for the PMC faction. But my final leak is one that they published in one of their blogs showcasing the new worn weapon skins, and this was a little while ago now. And if I'm not mistaken, that to me looks like a mortar carrier behind the soldier's arm. Well, what I am struggling is to work out if it's the M106, or an M1129, or an M113 mortar carrier. Maybe one of you guys in the comments can tell me, but I'm leaning towards one of the two tracked variants just due to the shape of it. Either way, it looks like the US Army are about to get a few new toys. There's also something going on over here which looks more like a BTRD or BMD chassis for the Russian ground forces too, but I can't see enough to make any more good guesses. And the last thing that we can all hope for is for some serious optimization. We haven't seen any optimizations made for a long time now, and as each update comes out, performance of myself and many others have gotten much worse. Servers are still fighting the unlocked tick rate bug, which has been with us for nearly 6 months now. That's when the server gets loads of little micro stutters, you have problems reloading, and getting in and out of vehicles becomes a real issue. And the only way to fix this is to restart the server, which is something that I do every day with Dead on Dismount. So hopefully this year there will be some solid conscious effort to sort this side of squad out, because if not, this is the side that's hurting them badly. What would you like to see in squad next? Let me know down in the comments below, or tell me about it in my Discord. Thank you all for watching, take care, and I'll catch you in my next video or in my server. Good night.
Get fucked in here.
Left.